I don't want to get famous. Now, this is something that's like, what are you talking about, bro? What are you what are you mentioning? Well, I really can hope that this video does not make me famous or does not even get big, because really a lot of people don't expect to get famous and then they get famous. I'm gonna hope that this video just makes that a contradiction, so I can say, hey, I don't want to get famous. So by saying that, hopefully this video doesn't get big, because you know what? All my other videos haven't got big anyways. So let's hope this video doesn't get big either. But let's go over the reasons why I don't want to get famous, and why I think just being famous in general comes with so many problems. And the biggest thing for me is that there's so many stresses to worry about. I mean, like, remember the good old days, right? Where people have aspirations, where they want to do something like, man, I want to change the world. I want to do all this cool stuff. And yeah, try that nowadays. I mean, as far as I look at, anything creative arts-wise, whether it be music, poetry, writing, you're not gonna get that big unless you happen to have some sort of genius marketing strategy or you sell your soul. And for the most part, yeah, I don't want to do either one of those. The marketing strategy is dependent on, well, if you have that platform, that first center of outreach, or if you have connections with other people. And that kind of plays into, well, what systems are then currently at place to allow that to happen. And then you say, well, if you're in Hollywood, it makes it easier. Well, if you're in Scientology, it makes it easier. Well, if you're in this group, it makes it easier, etc., right? And this is why you can join different groups and sort of market and advertise, etc. But now you have ties to other groups, and then it becomes a conflict of interest between other groups. It turns into this big mess, right? Which already within itself is problematic and highly complex. But I'm not saying that I'm against the work involved for such marketing. I think that marketing is necessary, as I talk about all the time, with integration and bringing people together, mass amounts of numbers of people, so they can think about strategies about how to change the world in different ways. I talk about this in my books as well. But the point of this video is that there's too many stresses to worry about. I'm going to name just some here in this video, but there's even more that people don't always take into account until they get famous. And a lot of famous people are warning people about this, like, hey, it's not so great being famous, it's not so great having all the money in the world. And so really, it's like, I want to be content, I don't want to have too much. And I think a lot of people want that, right? They want to be content, they want to have enough, they don't want to have too little or too much, right? They prefer too much over too little, and that can be an issue as well. But they need to realize that there's a level of contentedness, and you can have that contentedness even with little, because who's to say it is little, and who's to say you need to have some sort of unnatural, man-made currency or man-made thing, the best next phone, the next best car or television set, and making sure it's, ultra HD, wide definition, Blu-ray, blah blah blah. Blu-ray's not even used, I don't even know why I mentioned that. But you get the point, right? It's like, you have people who had aspirations in the past, and like, great, but what about nowadays? You got technology, you got media, and if somebody gets big, it's like, okay, you have all these trolls that are going to flood your accounts, you got people who are going to hack you, find out where you live, they're going to do all this stuff to you, and it's like, bro, I don't even want to mess with that, right? But this is the world we live in, and I worry that that can happen to anybody. And I'm not just talking about myself, I'm talking about anybody. And I'd rather have a small, very close community rather than some big, uncontrolled community where they're going crazy and causing me to have problems within myself, because that's how you see all these people, getting suicidal thoughts, etc., all these influencers, and you're like, well, they have it easy, they have all the money in the world, they have all this stuff, why would they have that mentality of doing something to themselves? Well, think about it. They're under constant stress. Do they have a difference between their public and private life? Do they know, who to introduce to their life? Or because that person could be using them, they could be using them for money or for power or for influence. You have to worry about all these things that in just everyday life you don't really have to worry about as much. And there's benefits to working under somebody. There's benefits to just having fun and not worrying about the world. There's benefits to not being a business owner with multitudes of, empires. There's benefits to things that people think might be beneficial, but there's also a lot of downsides that people don't always look at. So it's really important to address that. And I think, a lot of young people are like, man, I look at these YouTubers, look at these Twitch people, these TikTokers, right? And they're like, man, I want to be like one of them, not realizing what they're getting themselves into and what type of situation that happens so often, but yet that goes ignored. And that is worth mentioning. And, again, like I said, a lot of famous people warn about it all the time, people who get money, and they're like, well, this is not actually all that great, and you have to then hire people and make sure you work over them, and then what if there's conflicts between the workplace? I mean, it's hard, right? But that's a business. It's ultimately a business, and there's no violence involved like there is in government, and where you can just kick people out, and it's even worse, I would say, in many degrees, and then it causes a lot of conflict in the lower classes, per se, even though we shouldn't really have this class system, per se. And the government causes a lot of problems. I talk about that a lot on my channel. You can see by the shirt, it says slaves by government. I talk about slavery. But being famous and being a celebrity is different from being a politician who's seeking power. In fact, I'd rather give a lot more credence to the person who's famous because they're influencing people. And they often might feel like they can have political positions. It's like, why are they getting into politics? Well, it's because of their influence. They feel like they're obligated to speak up about certain things. It becomes particularly problematic if they choose to participate in politics and give it a legitimacy, which, as we all understand, people who understand what politics is, it's the will being imposed upon other people. Somebody saying, hey, I want this done, or I will represent all of you if you vote for me, and therefore be dependent upon other people to be the change in the world. Let the people in these holy written texts on the Constitution and on law be that of which must be worshipped by people to follow, whether it be law enforcement, etc. Everybody has to worship this text, and then don't just forget that paper. Also, the money. The money's another paper that people worship. And may you say the celebrities worship that and the politicians, worship the law. It's everybody's worshiping these things because we're all creating these systems. We're the ones creating the celebrities and we're the ones creating the politicians. And a lot of people treat these politicians, especially the big ones, as celebrities, and the celebrities as politicians because they somehow look up to them for their life. Like, I need to put this person on a pedestal and say that they have the best judgment for what I should do in my own life. I should look up to them. And it's like, yeah, celebrities can have some good tips of advice depending on what they've done, but how far are you willing to go with that? How much are you going to experiment within your own life? How much are you going to look at all the different people out there? And then also, like I said, the problems with these celebrities, because there's problems, and a lot of people talk about this. I'm not the only one. There's billions of videos on the web. You might be aware yourself, but the identity issue within the world. A lot of people are on social media for a certain identity. They want to be this or want to be that. They're fake spiritual. They do this to scam their audience. There's people who will do things like this, and their audience will just be completely willing to submit, completely order followers without thinking for themselves. Well, sounds a lot like people following politicians. And I'm not here to make a compare and contrast between celebrities and politicians, but I'm here to say you shouldn't put anybody on a pedestal or anybody above your own life, and you should still consider your own life above all things, and you should make your own observations of the world around you. Don't just use the radio, don't just use independent media, don't just use mainstream media, don't just use all of that. You don't even need any of that, to be honest with you. All you need is your natural reason, your natural observations of looking around the world around you, because that is how you naturally learn. And then, if you have parents, let's say you don't have parents, you become the parent, right? You learn how to be the natural you, the optimized you, for the natural world, which I discuss heavily in detail in my book Sapientia Naturae, which translates to the wisdom of nature in Latin. This book goes over a lot of things. I have a whole landing page if you're interested on nita.one/wisdom. Feel free to check it out. And then my slavery book, the one back here, is nita.one/truth. But this goes over a lot of topics, and you're like, well, okay, Corey, don't you want this to get out to a lot of people? And I'm like, yeah, I do, But why should it be done through me? Why should I get famous? Okay, yeah, I wrote that, but why should I get all the credit? This is for all of humanity. And why do I want to talk about slavery? Why do I want to talk about these deep, dark, subjects? Why do I want to be considered an expert on the subject? Like, these things shouldn't even be in existence. I don't even want to be talking about slavery, right? I don't want to be talking about how the world might end and humans will go crazy and there's zombie apocalypses and collapses, right? I don't want to talk about those things, but sometimes it's like, yeah, okay, I got to. Why? Because I want to reach out to people. Then you say, well, Corey, then you want to get famous. No, I want the information to get famous. Big difference. The information. So how do I do that? How do I do that? Well, first, there's a lot of pressures if you make it big in these topics for talking about touchy topics like what's happening in the world. I'm not going to mention the touchy topics, especially on mainstream platforms, but I'm on different platforms for that reason, and I encourage people always go on to those alternative platforms or alternatives in general of any kind, whether it be medicine or not. So touchy topics, I mean, there's a lot of things, and more things are becoming increasingly touchy, even the most basic things of our nature. And that's how you know that there's something not right about the world we live in, that we are being compromised at a very basic, fundamental human level. And just because there's pressures for talking about that, and especially as you get big and famous into the world and get censored and get attacked, and there's hit pieces and articles and the media's calling you out, etc., you should not fear. The truth is the truth, right? And that's why I do what I do. I don't think about it as identity. I don't think about getting famous. I just do what I follow. I follow my call. I follow the call to nature. I follow the call to truth. That is my following. That is my truth. That is where I get my learning from, is from the natural world, from what is meant to be. And I don't need to talk about all these things where it's like, trust me, bro, I got the sources, just trust me, and here's a list of sources. Like, no, I'm going to appeal to your common sense, to your reason, because we're all human beings. I'd rather talk about those things than things where it's like, okay, let's talk about politics for some person we don't know in some place we don't know, next to some events that we have no clue that's happening, but we see on the media and therefore trust. And it's like, okay, well, I trust this more, but I trust this less. It's like, you still don't know. And the point is, I want people to get knowledge from the world around them directly. And that's what I go over a lot within my books. But a lot of people as well, like even with my books, right, or even with any topic, is especially as you gain a following per se, which again, we got to differentiate brain dead followers from people who are actually part of the community, probably producing community content themselves, or within the content, they're contributing to the content. There's people who will validate your ego, right? I mean, they will literally feed your ideas. They're like, man, bro, you got the best ideas here. Man, I'm gonna back you all the way. It's like, I'm not asking for that. I have a movement, right, which is using certain symbology and certain websites and certain knowledge, but I don't want to include myself. I don't want to feed my ego. And we're not feeding anybody's ego if nobody's really the center of the movement. We're feeding the idea's ego, which doesn't have an ego. The idea needs to be raised if it's an important idea, objectively, if that idea is not in circulation within the mass public. And now, because it isn't, some people will capitalize on that and say, well, I have this special knowledge that other people don't, and, using all these marketing techniques, which, again, can also create validation and ego, and can create certain spaces where it's like you're attracting certain types of people. And you also gather respect based on numbers, like, oh, bro, this guy got hundreds of thousands, and oh, this guy's got millions of followers, so, like, we can trust him. Like, no, that's not how it works. But a lot of people come to those conclusions. It's like, oh, well, this guy has professional thumbnails, and it's like, that doesn't matter. Mark Passio can put out, hours and hours and hours of really good detailed content. Some people put out really good music. They get no attention in the world because you have these select celebrities who get all the attention because they sold their soul, or you could have people who don't put as much effort in certain things but put huge effort in other things, and they're still constantly trying to improve upon themselves, and they're just trying to strive in this world, and they're not getting as much attention. That's why I always seek those alternatives, because who's to say who's a celebrity? I mean, we're all people, and we're all just people. So I'd rather get famous after my time. I'd rather these ideas, if they're going to trace back to me because I have my name on certain things, just to give them authorship, right, and to put them on different marketing platforms, because I'm putting myself also online, and people are going to trace things back to me because I'm the one who's delivering the message, I'm the one giving the presentations and writing the books. I hope that actually I'd rather get famous after my time, because a lot of people of the past, a lot of people who have also made a big difference, did get famous after their time, after they wrote their fancy works after their amazing stuff, and I'd rather see what the generations ahead can do with it. I know that maybe within my generation I can't get this movement started, I can't do certain things that I know it can really help move the world in a certain direction, but I can provide the foundation, the blueprints, and then they can carry it on. Because I know that there's a level of opportunity involved. There's a level of how much of the world needs to collapse for people to actually do something, to wake up, to actually embrace change, to seek solutions, to talk to their neighbors, stuff like that, right? And there's going to be problems in the world that lead to solutions, and then there's going to be solutions that are also going to be the problems. And this is just going to lead people into a constant search for truth, if not complete confusion, getting lost of who they are themselves, which then goes back to the ideas I talk about. Slavery, which is at the root to all freedom, and you have nature, which is at the root to all life. I mean, if you lose your humanity because of robots taking over the world, or you're becoming a zombie because you're just following orders all day, what's going to happen? Well, you're going to get a wake-up call from nature. One way or another, the human species will fall because they don't have enough intelligence to keep up with the machines, or enough intelligence to keep up with themselves. And this is why education is so important. I talk about it all the time. But I'm really glad I'm not big, I have somewhat of a community, like I said, and I'd rather have that than just have millions of followers. But even if I did, per se, I couldn't try to handle it. But is it natural for somebody, because we have a culture where certain people are being put upon others and on pedestals and identities, is it natural to have millions of followers and all these people depend upon you, watching you all day long, 24 hours, not talking to you face to face, being able to type away because, their insecurities can be typed away on a screen, but if you meet them in person, they're like totally different. It's the world we live in, right? And I think that's why there's so many stresses to worry about when it comes to being famous or having any level of actually impacting influence. It becomes problematic. But of course, there are celebrities out there celebrities that aren't really that big, who do a good job, who are making a living, who are pretty content, who have a community. And those are really interesting, like Twitch communities. They're not that big right now, but they're relatively big, enough to make a difference in the world. And I think that's really aspiring. That's something I do look up to. At the same time, even they have stresses because the internet is a cesspool. It just grows, right? And especially when your stuff is everywhere and out there, it can get really, really nasty. It can go so many different directions. So especially even in your family, right? Let's say you have a family and they're connected to you, who are somebody who has a lot of influence or some sort of power position per se, or even offspring, right, where you have children. I mean, there's an awkwardness that is built upon those relationships, and there's problems that are formed because of the pressures that also seep into your personal life. So I think the whole situation is just not something I would want to get involved with. And again, I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for just the nature of getting famous in today's world. It's not so great as you would think. And that's not coming from somebody who's famous. It's coming from the many people who are famous, who are saying these things. And it's coming from somebody who's actually an observer from nature. That's who I am. I'm an observer of nature. I'm away from the rest of the world for the most part, and therefore I can observe what's going on in my environment. I'm not in it. I'm an outsider. I'm constantly looking outside. I have views that are outside. I'm doing things that are outside, and all the knowledge I have is outside the mainstream. I mean, what's the next step for me? Going off the grid? Not necessarily, but it's amazing because then you could see even more of what's happening within society. And since they're the insiders, right, the people who are going along with things in that society, they don't see things because they're in it. And that's why they need outsiders to help provide them with more perspective. But then they end up being the outsiders too and realize, well, shoot, there's a bunch of insiders. And then, of course, you can look at that ripple effect, and then now the outsiders become the insiders, or they stay within their echo chambers, and then they have that ego validation problem I mentioned. there needs to be that constant expansion. That's why I talk about the movement. That's why I say it's about everybody. That's why I encourage people to get the word out to other people, because there needs to be that constant expansion. You can keep emailing and messaging people within your communities about certain things that are going on. You can give them knowledge and inputs and say, do this, do that. But what about the new people that you're reaching out to? And how much seeds are you willing to plant? And if there's one person planting a seed and they're like, oh my gosh, this is really hard because these people are stuck in their belief system, they're stuck in doing what they want to do. Well, what if there were two? What if there were three? What if there were four people who stood by that individual? What if there was more people? And what if, and then you say, well, this goes back to the ideas of numbers. Do people respect you based on numbers? Well, they'll respect the amount of human dedication put into something. They'll respect the amount of energy in the room, especially with the human presence. So I'm not just talking about online here. I'm talking about real life events. And so there's a lot of dynamics to this. There's a lot of layers, and I'm interested in hearing your thoughts about this. But that's my thoughts, my basic thoughts on why I don't want to get famous, why I don't think anybody really should want to, because you have to question, why would they want to in the first place? And I think the goal is to live happy in life, to be content, to be healthy, to be moral, and all those things are interrelated. So thank you very much for watching. This is Corey and Angelot. Nature is the answer. What more could you want from life if you have those things?